Good morning. This is Kelsey from Kels Reads Things at Anna Porter Public Library in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and I'm excited today to finally discuss with you Again by E. Lockhart. Now, this is a young adult literary read. It combines theory as well as practice, especially in terms of philosophy and specifically in terms of potential alternate realities, which was really interesting to read about and seems to be a relatively popular topic at this time. Another story I've read similar to this was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and that video review is also on my YouTube channel. Just click the link. Okay, so let's dive into Again. I'm going to start by just discussing the basic plot. Broken-hearted Adelaide will experience the summer before her senior year at Alabaster boarding school again and again in more ways than one. Through descriptive imagery, the reader is exposed to Adelaide's world and her mind, as well as to the realities that may or may not exist. In the short span of a summer break, Adelaide will fall in love more than once and also learn about herself in the process. Walking dogs, creative projects, family's tragedies, supportive friends, and the determination to restore strained family relationships are what are in store for Adelaide this summer as she experiences life and all of its wild possibilities. Okay, so that was just a very condensed version of the plot of this book. It's not very long, but the components and what it holds tells a huge story, a story of possibilities. Some things that you should know about this book before you pick it up. I think it's appropriate for most young adult audiences. I will say it's a bit advanced in terms of the layout, how it's written, and the vocabulary. So I would say maybe your later teens, you would be more likely to kind of understand the context and understand the purpose of the book. There are a few trigger warnings, such as substance abuse, family tragedies, and being an addict. Okay, so now I'd like to talk about a few of the themes of the book as well and dive into those a little bit more. It's definitely a young adult literature book. There is a lot of prose and poetry throughout, especially in terms of when Adelaide is either standing up for herself a little bit or expressing her opinions or feelings about things. I've noticed that the writing would go from regular, back and forth to in a poetry format and style, which was really beautiful, and it almost made me feel like she was exposing her true self when the text turned into poetry, which is very important. And I say that's important because Adelaide is known for hiding her true feelings. There has been a huge family tragedy. At the start of the book, the tragedy has already occurred, but she's kind of trying to pick up the pieces, so to speak, especially in terms of her broken heart. And it's broken in more ways than one, outside of just romantic love. It also has to do with platonic love, sisterly love, daughterly love. There's a lot that's just going on in her immediate family, and Adelaide personally feels like she has to kind of hide that about herself throughout the novel and put on a facade and a fake face of happiness. And whenever she expresses herself in poetry, when that changes, I feel like it's very important, and it speaks a lot to her character. I love that she's exposing herself, so to speak, for once, and her true feelings. Throughout the novel, there's a lot of mirroring and reflections of what Adelaide is experiencing to what's going on in her head, as well as to the message of the entire book, that reality is open to countless possibilities. In fact, there is a set design model that Adelaide is working on throughout the summer. She has to finish this model in order to pass the class because she has been on academic probation at this point in the book because of all the things that she's dealing with, school was kind of the last thing on her mind, and now to make up for that, she has to do a set design project for the play Fool for Love. I believe that the design of the set is a reflection of what Adelaide shows of herself to the world. It's described as shiny, bright, and gold, but not genuine, like it's fake. And not actually valuable, which was really interesting. She described it almost as if it was a lie to cover up this true state of her mind and her being. Like I said before, it's very heavy on the philosophical approach. There are multi-universes slash possible worlds throughout the novel, and it's a little bit jarring because you can never quite tell if these are instances that are happening in Adelaide's head or if they are happening in other realities. It never actually says. The only way to indicate that there's a little bit of a change, the text changes completely. So you got what looks to be almost a Times New Roman text, and then you have almost like a Comic Sans sort of text, and this happens throughout the novel without any warning. So if I had one critique, I might say something along the lines of maybe be just a little bit more descriptive, but I also think it's kind of left up to our interpretation, which is really interesting, and I will delve on that a little bit further in just a bit. There was also the theme of losing yourself in not only your relationships, but the ideology of a relationship, the idea of someone, the idea of being in love. Adelaide, I feel, uses the idea of love to distract herself multiple times throughout the novel, from her own trials and her own family issues she's dealing with. One thing I also love is that throughout this journey, throughout these possibilities, Adelaide eventually learns her own worth and doesn't focus as much on what others' opinions are of her, which is very important because, again, as I said, she puts on a face, and it's, I believe, for fear of judgment, as well as she wants to be the good child, so to speak. And that's all I'm going to say on it, because if I tell you what the family is going through, I personally feel like it'll be a large spoiler. Some people have definitely mentioned what the tragedy is in their reviews on Goodreads, and I'm sure on Amazon. If you would like to actually know what happens, please feel free to go there, but I will not be discussing that today because I personally like to go into books nearly blind, and that's how I'm trying to do my reviews. I just want to give a slight synopsis and a little bit of information about the themes. And if I don't think I actually said this, not only do I think the set design is a reflection of her, I also think it's a metaphor for her life, for how she presents herself and how she sees herself at first. And as she's working on that project, I noticed that she's working on herself too, which was really fascinating. Something else that I liked about the text and the writing style was a lot of the writing was also a reflection of the purpose of the book. It's like it was a full circle multiple times, and not just Adelaide said things that really I felt like were the purpose of the book, but other characters said things to her that really were eye-opening, and I will give some examples of that in the quotes that I'm going to mention in just a bit. The family dynamics and the relationships Adelaide had with her family, I think, were the most interesting parts of the book. Yes, I was interested in to see how her romantic prospects ended up, but honestly, the core and the heart of the book was the family relationships, without a doubt. There was a bit of an off-kilter feel to the book where it didn't feel quite stable, and again, I felt like that was a metaphor and a reflection of Adelaide herself, and it was just chef's kiss, beautifully done. As someone who also suffers with anxiety, I felt like some of the realities were definitely, in my opinion, Adelaide's mind, and she's playing out potential scenarios. Or at least that's how I interpreted it. And I appreciated that as someone who does suffer with anxiety, because you do tend to do that sometimes. Overthinking, we're known for that. Alright, now I would like to mention a few quotes that really stuck out to me and that I personally think either reflect the purpose of the novel or are definitely part of the heart of it. On page 122, and I believe that this was on the mind slash repetition. Adelaide dropped into this exhibit. She's in an art exhibit at this time. Something was there. Something about her own life that she could not put words to. Suddenly, she didn't know where the floor was or where the walls were. The repetitions in the reflection offered no exit. This wasn't a room you could enter or leave. It was the inside of a mind, both infinite and constrained into repetition. Maybe that was the point. On page 127, on a set design model, discussing her set design model, her life had become this box, and she was building. A box to house a play about a sad, obsessive love. And I think that has to do with not just her romantic pursuits, but her platonic relationships as well. On page 135, this is in a different realm of reality in which her brother dies. And that's the only thing I'm going to say about it. Again, this is an alternative reality. We don't know if this is what actually occurs or not. And I will get to that about the confusion of what is reality and what is in her mind and what is potentially just on another realm of reality. Okay, again, 135 in a reality in which her brother Toby dies. She was a Boston girl, a public school girl, a girl so steeped in sadness that no antic charm or easy distractibility developed to compensate for the milder sadness and worry that was her personality as we know it. But also, the worst had happened. Toby was dead. This Adelaide didn't carry around the fear for him, the dread of him, that haunts her in other possible worlds, and that she works so hard to conceal. On page 209, on Wishing for Love, all four of them took a moment to wish. Adelaide wished to love someone and to be loved back, and to love someone and know it was him she loved, not some idea of him. Maybe that was 2 wishes. Maybe it was 1. And I love that specific quote because, again, it's almost like a metaphor for the purpose of the book. Like, what is reality and what can we make a possibility in this reality or other realities? Very philosophical in approach. On page 254, this is Adelaide speaking to her set design teacher who has just insulted her set design project that she's worked on like all summer, and she was very unfair about it, I personally think, and as does Adelaide. She was pretty cruel in her critiques. So this is what Adelaide had to say to her. No matter how much you hate it, you could take the time to see it. Instead of complaining that my design doesn't measure up to the imaginary version, A-grade design that's in your mind, you could let that imaginary version go and see what's in front of you. And again, I think this is another just full circle quote about seeing the possibilities, seeing what's in front of you, paying attention, seeing what's beyond the surface. Just a very, very full circle kind of quote. On page 283, this is the very last quote I will mention, and it's a little bit long, but it definitely encompasses some extreme thoughts and feelings of whole book. So here we go. These things would become tangible under her fingers, and in making them, Adelaide would heal her bleeding wounds and release her fury. She'd open her lungs so that she could breathe the wet air of a New England fall, and she'd open her heart to people and dogs. She would love herself even with her sadness and her distractibility, her defenses and her failures. The process of making would stretch open the universe until it was frighteningly and gloriously wide with possibility. Okay, and that's the last of the quotes that I wanted to mention, and now I'm going to give you my overall thoughts of the entire book. I thoroughly enjoyed reading about Adelaide and her process, especially in terms of how she meets each potential love interest, and I guess I should have touched on this earlier. Adelaide starts the novel by having been dumped. by a guy that she really thinks that she loved. And then she encounters another young man when I believe he is of like Italian or Greek descent, while she is walking dogs for her summer job. And it was interesting how she met him. And then there was another love interest who is a pianist. And I can't really talk about all of them too much without giving too much away, but just know there's like at least 3 potential love interests for her in this book. The writing style, though beautiful, just the words, just the metaphors, beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. However, again, as I mentioned before, sometimes it was confusing. You weren't sure what reality was the one you were supposed to be following, and if there was even a reality to follow. It's kind of left up to interpretation. And overall, it's a fantastic literary read. I recommend it to most audiences. Now, when it comes to rating the book, I originally, when I first finished it, felt empty. That's the only word I can really use to describe how I felt without giving anything away. So at first, because of that feeling, I was going to give it like 2 stars. But after some reflection and reading other reviews and just kind of going back and rereading a few passages and seeing it in a different light, I realized the brilliance that E. Lockhart has put into this work. She is fantastic about that. She's very much a deep writer, very philosophical. I definitely recommend her for someone who wants something very gripping in their reading and something that makes you think and consider all the possibilities. And finally, the execution of reality versus Adelaide's mind and or potential other realities, again, was not always clear, and it's really just kind of left up to interpretation. So because of that, and because I didn't necessarily felt like I got a concrete ending, so to speak, I gave it 4 stars. But in general, I think philosophers would probably give it 5 stars because it was just, like I said, the execution of the purpose of the book and how she wrote that was just beautiful. Okay, thanks so much for watching and for dealing with like the sun coming in at different angles throughout this video. You're a trooper for putting up with it with me, and I thank you very much, and I look forward to eventually discussing many books with you in the future. I am currently reading Breathless by Jennifer Niven, and I really am enjoying that one, and I'm not actually a huge fan of hers, so this is really refreshing to find a book of hers that I really like. And I'm also, of course, going to start on the A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas once I get my copies. Alrighty, well, I look forward to discussing those books with you in the future. Thanks so much and have a wonderful day.